Hey folks, it's Nate bringing you another Iron Age comic review, and today we are looking at the second half of the Narwhal Shorts Compendium, the actual Narwhal Shorts. And this is a book that I'm pretty glad to have because it collects several of Narwhal's short stories in a single place, which is very nice if you don't want to go digging through a whole bunch of other books or small, folders, bits of asides to find some of these stories that are really interesting and fun to have on hand. And I am going to be looking at these not so much in order, but as genres. So, for example, in this book, all of the Naked Samurai shorts are in here, but they're spread out. I'm just going to talk about them together. Then I'm going to talk about the what I call the Narwhal redrafts, which are an interesting idea. Then I will talk about the individual shorts, and finally I will talk about the Earthbound shorts, because there are Earthbound shorts in this as well, which is something I don't think I fully understood from the Kickstarter. Admittedly, I just skimmed that because I knew I was going to buy it. So, I was just figuring out what exactly perk I wanted. And I guess there are Earthbound shorts in this, and there are Earthbound shorts in the B-sides. These are not so much direct prequels to Earthbound 3 as they are kind of world-building shorts. At least that's what it feels like. It doesn't feel like you have to have read any of the other Earthbound stuff to really understand them, which is nice and fits much better with this kind of a collection, whereas the B-sides one really feels like the more appropriate venue for a kind of prequel short for the hardcore collector. So let's talk a little bit about the Naked Samurai. For full disclosure, I have worked on a longer Naked Samurai project in collaboration with Narwhal, so this is something that's really interesting to me. I have read all of these before. Again, it is nice to have them in this one book that is very nice. Physically, I guess I should talk about that real quick. That is part of my normal style. Physically, this book is very nice, just like the other one is, as I've said many times before. It has magazine-style paper with a matte finish, which is something I generally prefer to a high gloss, and it reads quite well. I have no complaints about the quality of this book. I have read many of Narwhal's books repeatedly in the past. They hold up to it quite well. Whatever printer he uses, I believe he uses Ninja Print, but whatever printer he uses does a good job as far as binding and longevity. You can read this probably a couple of dozen times and it will still hold up quite well and look very nice on your shelf, provided you don't let a 6-year-old take it and sit on it or throw it across the room or something like that, which you really shouldn't do with your comics anyways, or maybe with your floppies but not with your graphic novels like this. The stuff you're going to keep. Floppies, they'll get saved as much unless you're one of those 90s guys that looked at them as some kind of investment, which you really shouldn't do. But let's talk more about the stories themselves. Naked Samurai, I've read all 3 of these. Each of them is a story about a character who may or may not be the legendary Naked Samurai, who uses his wit to overcome a specific difficult situation. 2 of these have art and story by Narwhal. The third one is written by Narwhal with art by Fresher Luke. All 3 of them emphasize 2 things. Cleverness on the part of the Naked Samurai, the titular character, or at least the person pretending to be the Naked Samurai, and frenetic action, which you might expect from something called samurai. All 3 of them are clever. I think the second one really shows off the cleverness of the character the most, because he plays a really great gambit in a single tense confrontation that is well set up and well realized. I think the third one shows that you don't necessarily have to have this character illustrated by Narwhal. Let me find the third one real quick if I can. Fresher Luke's art really gives it a nice twist, and you can tell it's the same character, and he has that same kind of irreverence and frenetic way of moving. Here we go. But he looks very different, of course, as you would expect with Fresher Luke's style. So each of these is quite good. Each of them does well with the basic premise. I don't know how many of these you could write. Probably quite a few, and I would look forward to seeing more. I also think that the longer story that Narwhal and I worked on is quite good too. Hopefully you'll get to see that one day. But you don't have to read any of these to understand that story. I just think they're a good time. And if you like swashbuckling action and a kind of digestible, almost Popeye format, I mean, it's not the same format as Popeye the Sailor Man, but it is a self-contained adventure with some funny hijinks and a number of kind of crazy, hard to believe powers that you don't really care. It's comic book logic. It works very well on the page. It would probably work pretty well animated on the screen if you could find somebody that you trusted to do that. But nobody like that exists in the modern day. So for now, you'll just have to enjoy it on the page. Next, let's talk about what I call Narwhal redrafts. And both of these are quite interesting. Narwhal does some very experimental things with them. An occurrence on Owl Creek Bridge was originally written by Ambrose Bierce. It's a story about the Civil War, the hanging of a man who the rope hanging him breaks, and he escapes by a river because they were hanging him off the side of a bridge. It's quite interesting. It's quite introspective. It's not exactly an exciting story. It has a very real sense of malaise and impending doom over it, which is appropriate. If you haven't read this, several hundred-year-old piece of literature, I'll spoil it for you now. Almost everything that you see in the story is a hallucination by the man as his neck is breaking and he's being hung. So none of this stuff actually happens, aside from the part where he's thrown off the edge of the bridge and he eventually dies. And to represent this, Narwhal has done something really interesting. He's generated a number of images using Midjourney, I believe, is not Stable Diffusion. I believe it was. Yeah, Midjourney AI. But then he has hand-drawn his own images on top of that. So it's an interesting blend of imagery. Some panels are just AI images, like this one here, that represent abstract thoughts, I suppose. And I think there's a certain surreal horror to the images. Another one, as we see the body hanging there, is this, kind of cosmic view of death. And it says that Narwhal had some assistance from Sheila Aliens and a few other people who helped him work with Midjourney. I'm not sure what capacity they worked in there. Okay, yeah, just Sheila Aliens. I thought maybe there was another one in there, but just her. So it's an interesting blending of styles. I think that for some of this surreal imagery, it works kind of well. Here's another really bizarre, strange image that I guarantee was spat out by Midjourney. And for generating backgrounds, it does okay as well. I don't know how many times Narwhal had to generate images for this. It works. It works. There's definitely a sense of clashing here. I don't know how much you could do this for, but I think my personal sense is that the clashing of colors between the way Narwhal colors something with his very simple, almost cel-shaded style, and the rich tones of AI, I don't know, something about them doesn't work. It's not quite as organic as I would like it to be. That does add to the surrealness of the images a little bit, but it's so jarring that I think it takes me out of the experience more than it draws me in. Half the time as I was reading this, I found myself blocking one part of the image out entirely. I was either looking at Narwhal's figures or the background, and I had a hard time processing them together. I don't know if that's just me, if that could be improved upon. I'm sure there's some kind of methodology you could use to help that. Maybe we just haven't found it yet. The other one is a retelling of Mask of the Red Death as seen through the lens of the COVID pandemic. And this is very interesting. It's set in the modern day. We have these very modern-looking characters. This is not illustrated by Narwhal. This is illustrated by Mistress Mantoe. I hope I pronounced that right. I'm pretty sure it's not Manto, but it could be. Either way, a very interesting kind of magical realism style of illustrating. Narwhal did the colors, which kind of gives it a unity with the rest of the book, and it's very interesting. The illustrations of the faces, I don't know if this is Mantoe's usual style, but they are kind of grotesque, which is appropriate for the story. And maybe this is something that Mantoe has trained a lot to develop, and it's just something she really likes. I don't know for sure. Either way, this is a retelling of the classic Edgar Allan Poe story, kind of reversed. Instead of being a masquerade, all the staff is wearing masks, and the nobles don't to show, the difference in quality. The Mask of the Red Death still appears and kills everyone, but some of the servers are allowed to escape. So it's a little bit of a twist on a classic story. It's quite fun to read, and I told him, he let me look at the script for this early on. I told him I was really surprised no one else had taken that view on the story, and it's appropriate, I think, for everything we saw during those time periods. This is not a political tale per se. It is more about the social dynamics that tend to appear between upper class and lower class people in a time of crisis. And I think this was what Edgar Allan Poe was talking about when he wrote The Mask of the Red Death, and I think Narwhal's update holds on to those themes and does some interesting stuff to give it a new flair for the modern time. I think of the two of these, I prefer Mask of the Red Death, but they're both pretty good. What I like about Mask of the Red Death is that it is updated with something to say about how the classic story reflects the world today. I think you could do that with an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge as well. You could do it in any number of venues, from, say, the Ukraine war to the modern rioting in U.S. cities around Black Lives Matter, or even January 6th. All of these would be appropriate venues to update that story. And while Narwhal was trying to do something very experimental visually with that one, so I understand why he didn't also use it as a lens for the modern day, I think I probably would have enjoyed it more if I didn't have an example of one of these classic stories re-lensed through the modern day right next to it, because the contrast made Mask of the Red Death a little bit sharper, at least feel a little bit sharper, even though as stories they are both also trying to do very different things. So just some thoughts there. I think both of them are... I talk a lot about iterative storytelling on this channel, looking at stories through the lens of the story circle. And I think Narwhal has done that quite successfully in both of these shorts. So I feel like I should like them both a lot. And there's something to the fact that I like Mask of the Red Death more than I like An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. I don't know exactly what it is yet. I'm going to have to think about it some more. And I'm glad I read this particular shorts collection just to have the comparison in my head, and just to be thinking about it as I try and work out this story circle formulation of iterative storytelling and how that really helps us improve the art form. Will it be interesting to the general reading public? I don't know. I think both of these are classic stories for a reason, and you would certainly enjoy reading them. Again, I don't know if my particular issue with the AI-generated art is going to carry through to other readers, so definitely give them a try. Robozan is a reimagining of a short that Narwhal has already done once, and in fact, the original short is in the B-Sides collection. And furthermore, I have talked with Narwhal about this short a couple of times. So I have a hard time digesting this story and then reviewing it, because I read it and I had a pretty good idea of what was going on, but the dialogue is pretty sparse. The exposition is almost non-existent. You just sort of go on this crazy romp through this sci-fi, almost chimpanzee dystopia that Narwhal has built. It's very interesting. I don't know how much will be readily apparent to people who haven't talked to Narwhal about this short or read the original. And I think, honestly, he probably should have bundled this Robozen and the original together, because I think that would have at least made them somewhat comprehensible. Because I feel like without some of the background that I already have on the story, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense to a lot of people. Also, as a side note, when talking about the creator of the chimpanzee simulation, Narwhal uses his own face, which I thought was kind of a nice gag. Cave Slave is a collaboration between Narwhal and Von Kloss that revolves around the titular girl who is a slave in a caveman society. And I think this story is fine. It is built very much on the idea of not prehistoric, but probably sandal punk is the best way to put it. We have a very low level of civilization. People live in tribal groups. They conquer each other. The people who are conquered are absorbed into the conquerors, and usually by killing all the men and marrying off all the women as slaves. Our protagonist is a woman who has been paired off in this way, except she gets her revenge on the people who have captured her. Well, not directly. This is basically an action romp with a really dangerous, sexy woman. And if you enjoy that, which most men do, you will probably enjoy this story. There's not a lot of complexity to it. It just starts you going real fast and never gives up much. And, a lot of the things that happen in it are totally unbelievable. There's the use of a mammoth tusk as a seesaw to launch someone in the air. There's a lot of stabbings and dismemberment that probably would not work with the kinds of weapons the characters use, because cave weapons, these kind of very low-tech weapons are very fragile. They tend to break on any kind of hard impact that is not, very carefully measured and delivered. This was a problem, actually, if you've ever watched documentaries on mammoth hunting. They couldn't do it with spears because, you jab the spear in the mammoth and it would break. And even if you didn't break, it wouldn't go deep enough because... Anyways, all of that is thrown out the window for comic book logic. I'm okay with that. I understand that kind of suspension of disbelief is not everyone's cup of tea in comics. It is what you're getting here, and if you're okay with that, it's a great story. If you're not, you're just not going to get over it. Kloss does not do anything unique or special with the way that the story is set up to help overcome that. This is genre fiction. Either you buy the genre or you don't. I think that's fine. Finally, we have the Earthbound shorts, which are called... And these two, I do want to be kind of a little more specific about. Okay, they are called Draft and Trade. Earthbound Draft and Earthbound Trade. And each of these does something very simple and direct. It tells us a little bit about the people who partake in the Grand Prix. The Grand Prix is an event we don't know a whole lot about yet, because recruiting for the Grand Prix was the focus of the first two Earthbound stories. Now that we're getting ready to actually go to the Grand Prix, Narwhal has done a couple of shorts that tell us a little bit about the mechanics of the Grand Prix and how the people who take part in it prepare themselves, what they have to do to get there. We even see one of the mysterious sponsors, not the 12th or 13th, who are the shadowy figures driving most of the events of the previous Earthbound stories, but rather the third sponsor, who is an interesting character who attempts to recruit someone for the Grand Prix, and it goes really badly. He trusts in a ring. This ring allows him to reincarnate whenever he dies. His consciousness is sent via the ring into a new body, which he essentially then takes over. It overrides any consciousness that might have been there before, where we get some hints that compatibility is a factor to this. It looks like some people keep kind of clones just floating around in vats to reincarnate to if they need it. But without the ring, this process doesn't work. Rings are very rare and very valuable, so not everyone does this. It is something for very powerful people like the sponsor. And there's apparently one alien race that can do it naturally. Possibly the people the technology is modeled on. Interesting mechanic, clearly going to be important, just like the R-types were in the first two stories. Clearly this reincarnation mechanic is going to be important in the Grand Prix somehow. So that's interesting. The trade is about how people get to the Grand Prix. We have two characters with reasons to doubt each other who kind of square off and agree to share stuff they'll need to get where they're going. That story is okay, but what's really interesting is the one story I haven't talked about yet, which is actually my favorite one in the shorts group, which is called Pickles. Pickles is a story. The art is by a artist called Danicat. I hope, again, I'm pronouncing that right. But written by Narwhal. And Danicat has a style that is very reminiscent of Narwhal's. I don't know if Danicat was deliberately trying to mimic Narwhal's style, or if this is just how they draw generally. Either way, this feels very organic to other parts of Narwhal's worlds. And at first I thought that was just a stylistic thing. It's a story entirely about a man who makes a bet with a bunch of people that he can prove he survived at sea for a week by drinking seawater. And the way he does it is by drinking a jar full of pickle brine. And it's a very interesting character study of all the people involved. This guy who drinks the pickles is a master of working a crowd. He's very charismatic. He reveals facts very slowly, deliberately, in such a way to harness people's attention and then get what he wants out of them. That's great writing. It tells us a lot about that character, and when he turns up later in trade, and he is revealed to be one of the members of the trade, we're not surprised at all, because in that story as well, he is using a lot of those negotiation and manipulation tactics to get what he wants out of his prospective trading partner. I loved that pairing of a story about the character and then a story very much about a plot and mechanics of how the Grand Prix works. I actually would have liked to see something like that in the other story, in Draft, yeah. Because there's a character in there who has a plot also going that I would have liked to see that play out in much the same way we see Pickles play out, that kind of conniving deviousness in a much lower stakes situation, and then see that iterated on in another story, like Narwhal did with Pickles and Trade. That was a great pair of stories that really built up a character in my mind, and really shows what you can do with short stories as a medium when you are just focusing on really tightly written narrative arcs that allow you to explore very different things but have the same characters in them. There is a belief, especially in modern television, that when you have a bunch of shows about the same, a season of television about the same group of people, every episode has to build into a single character arc that tells you a huge amount about them, and all the sub-arcs in individual episodes are kind of variations on a theme. I am told that you can see this really well in The Last of Us, The Last of Us TV show, which I haven't watched. And you can, kind of see how the showrunners do that in there, which is fine. But by having two completely unrelated scenarios that are cleverly tied together like this, Narwhal manages to let us see a character in two very different lights and get a deeper appreciation of him than kind of just always looking at him from one direction. I like it. I think this, probably more so than the Earthbound shorts in B-Sides, have me really excited for Earthbound 3 because I know I'm going to be seeing some of these characters in that, and I'm excited to see how they develop and what they do to cause trouble for our heroes there. All in all, Good stuff. I can see why this particular book was the highlight and the B-sides are the B-sides. The B-sides are good and they're fun for people with strong investment in Narwhal storytelling already. But if you want to give somebody a bunch of Narwhal short stories that will let them get a taste for how he writes and illustrates, this is going to do really good. If they read one story and don't like it, well, hey, in 10 pages, there's another story. Maybe they'll like that one. They're all a little bit different. They're all very unique from each other, the ones that aren't tied together. And I think that really gives you a kaleidoscope of what Narwhal can accomplish with his stories. And I think before this, I would have said, if you want to introduce someone to Narwhal, don't give them Earthbound Volume 1, give them Foreign Agent. Now I would say give them the Shorts Compendium, and that will give them a pretty strong understanding of what Narwhal can do and how he likes to do it, and then they can judge whether they want to read one of his longer books from that. Good stuff, worth picking up, and yeah, that's what I think of it. Let me know if you've read it, what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.